to the United States. One person has died, 21 others injured following a shooting at the end of the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl victory parade in Missouri. Shots were fired west of Union Station, the train station downtown in Kansas City, where thousands of fans gathered to watch the festivities. Local reports say Kansas City Chiefs players were still on a stage when the first shots rang out at about 2 p.m. local time. Officials have treated 8 victims who were in immediate life-threatening conditions and 7 others who suffered injuries that could prove life-threatening. 9 children were among the injured. All of them are expected to recover. Detectives on the scene immediately opened an investigation, and police have arrested 3 suspects in connection with the shooting. India's Supreme Court has scrapped a 7-year-old election scheme that allowed individuals and companies to make anonymous donations to political parties without any limits. A top court struck down the electoral bonds, calling it unconstitutional. Ruling comes ahead of a national election expected in mid-April. Electoral bonds were launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government in 2018 to make political funding more transparent, but critics say it's done the opposite and made the process more opaque, as Mr. Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party received most of the funds through the bonds. Today, a 5-judge constitution bench ruled that electoral bonds violate citizens' rights to access information held by the government. If you're in the UK, you're feeling the economic crunch. Here's why. The country has slipped into recession just months ahead of a general election. According to the Office for National Statistics, gross domestic product, a key measure of economic activity, dropped by 0.3% in the final 3 months of 2023, following a 0.1% contraction in the July to September period. A recession, as we know it, is commonly defined as 2 consecutive quarters of contraction. Several economists have characterized the economy as stagnant over the past year, raising questions over whether Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has met his pledge to grow the economy. Well, Japan is no longer the world's biggest economy. Germany is a new kid on the block. Official figures show Japan unexpectedly slipped into recession at the end of last year. Germany has now moved into 3rd place in terms of nominal gross domestic product. GDP shrank by an annualized 0.4% in the 4th quarter of last year, following a 3.3% slump, I should say, in the previous quarter. Japanese households have been struggling with a rising cost of living and declining real wages that led to a 0.2% drop in private consumption, which accounts for more than half of economic activity in the country. Away from the global economy, 2 South African soldiers have been killed, 3 others injured after a mortar bomb hit one of their military bases in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where its troops were sent to quell violence. It's the first casualties since the South African army began deploying to DRC last December. The attack happened in Sake, about 27 kilometers west of Goma. The South African army said in a statement it was a result of indirect fire, implying the base was not targeted, but further investigation will be conducted to determine the basis of the incident. South Africa's military, together with troops from Tanzania and Malawi, are part of the Southern African Mission in DRC, SAMI DRC, which was deployed to assist the government to bring peace, security, and stability in the restive east of the country. And the Turkish President Recep Erdogan is in Egypt. He has met his counterpart, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Both have declared the opening of a new chapter of relations after over a decade of estrangement. In a joint meeting in Egypt's capital, Cairo, the 2 leaders said they were turning a new leaf in their relations. It is the Turkish leader's first visit to Egypt in more than 10 years. Several bilateral agreements were also signed, with both leaders criticizing Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza and calling for a ceasefire. The 2 countries cut ties in 2013 after President al-Sisi, then Defense Minister, ousted Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, an ally of Turkey. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo has reshuffled his cabinet, replacing Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta as the West African country endures the worst economic crisis in a generation. Ofori-Atta, an ex-banker, has been in office since 2017. He's faced criticism for Ghana's financial crisis. At the height of the crisis in 2022, inflation surpassed 50% and the government defaulted on loan payment. It subsequently restructured its debts with creditors to qualify a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. Mohammed Amin Adam, who previously served as Deputy Energy Minister and Minister of State in the Finance Ministry, was on Wednesday appointed as Mr. Ofori-Atta's replacement. President Akufo-Addo replaced 12 other ministers in Wednesday's cabinet reshuffle, which precedes Ghana's December presidential elections. Meanwhile, in Somalia, authorities have banned the wearing of face masks in the capital, Mogadishu, due to security concerns. The decision was made during a recent security meeting in Mogadishu chaired by President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. The Mogadishu administration spokesperson, Salah Diere, explained that criminal elements have hitherto been using the masks, made popular during the pandemic, to hide their identity to commit nefarious activities. Authorities have also outlawed wearing of hats and carrying of weapons in public vehicles. But traditional Suna hats worn by elders are exempt from the ban. Somalia has been plagued by insecurity for years, main threats emanating from the Al-Shabaab militant group. Meanwhile, the African Development Bank and the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, says they're both committed to deepening their collaboration for displaced people and host communities in South Sudan. This comes as refugees are being relocated to settlements where resources are already overstretched.
The war in Sudan is exacerbating an already dire refugee situation in South Sudan. The UN Refugee Agency and the African Development Bank say they want to deepen their partnership for these refugees and the communities accommodating them. Senior officials from the African Development Bank and the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, paid a joint visit to Jendrassa refugee camp in South Sudan's Upper Nile state.
We are here in Maban, one of the places in South Sudan where we have a very significant influx of refugees and returnees from Sudan. Since April last year, this country has received more than 500,000 people, about 100,000 Sudanese refugees and about 400,000 South Sudanese returnees.
Since the start of the war in Sudan 300 days ago, more than 500,000 people have arrived in South Sudan, most of them South Sudanese who had been in Sudan for decades. Many are heading back to villages that barely have any services and where there is no humanitarian assistance available.
What we've seen is that there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of projects that they could be funding. We've heard from the authorities the importance of building a bridge that will expand the land that is available to refugees and to returnees. We heard of the possibility of building a dam that would reduce the impact of the floods that are affecting the region on a regular basis. So these are the kind of things that we humanitarian actors cannot fund, cannot mobilize funding for, but these are the kind of things that African Development Bank and other development actors can actually do.
Mary-Laurie Akiolubade, the bank's vice president for regional development, integration and business delivery, and Raouf Mazu, UNHCR's assistant high commissioner for operations, met with government authorities, refugees, and members of the host community.
We have decided to partner with the UNHCR because as part of the bank's strategy for addressing fragility and helping to build resilience in countries, one of the tenets is to leave no one behind. And we are extremely, and I think the international community should be very grateful to the government of South Sudan for their open policy in welcoming all refugees who are coming. We are really looking to help empower the youth and the women of this refugee camp, and to give them opportunities to be really positive contributors in their host communities, and bring about the skills, the knowledge that they had when the crisis struck, where they were coming from, and which they are bringing in the host communities.
The visit comes in the context of deepening partnership between the two institutions, strengthened collaboration among humanitarian and development actors globally, and an influx of more than 500,000 people fleeing the war in Sudan, including both Sudanese refugees and South Sudanese returnees.
And as we end the program at this hour, Russian President Vladimir Putin has a new preferred candidate in the United States elections holding in November this year. Asked by Russian journalist Pavel Zarubin who Putin would prefer in the White House, the Russian president chose President Biden over Donald Trump, citing Biden's predictability and experience. This election took everyone by surprise, including Trump himself. But typical Donald Trump said he was flattered by Mr. Putin's decision and called it a great compliment. Speaking to supporters in South Carolina, the former U.S. president said while he got along good with Putin during his time in office, the Russian leader, quote, doesn't want to have me for another term. Trump has repeatedly boasted that he would take a tougher stance towards U.S. adversaries than Biden, blaming the president's weakness for the conflict in Ukraine, Hamas' October 7 attack on Israel, and a recent drone strike on American troops stationed in Jordan, among other things. To each his own, I guess. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.